We begin by honoring some very special people who we call the legends of Off-Broadway. And the thing we love about honoring the legends of Off-Broadway is that they've had long and sustained careers. The people we're going to introduce you today have worked for 40 or 50 years Off-Broadway, and they keep coming back, and they keep doing amazing work. And they're part of what makes Off-Broadway so special and so important. So our first honoree is a visionary director whose extraordinary career coincided with the birth of non-for-profit theater in the 1960s. Robert Kalfin seized the moment when funding first became available to innovative arts groups to realize the dream of starting a new theater company. And the Chelsea Theater Center boldly produced some of the most challenging works of the modern theater for nearly 3 decades, including, I don't know whether anybody saw this, the 7-hour version of Genet's The Screens. Apparently, it was something to see. Bob introduced New York to new British voices like Edward Bond, Christopher Hampton, and David Story. He brought feminist playwrights into what had previously been predominantly male-run institutions. We're talking about the 1960s now. He produced so many works by African-American writers that people who hadn't met him just assumed that he was black. For Bob Kalfin, having this I love, having people walk out on his productions was as much a measure of success as having a commercial transfer. Basically, his attitude was, you may hate it, but you won't see it anywhere else. And so Bob moved productions to Broadway, including Yentl and his adaptation of Strider and Happy End, which, by the way, introduced New Yorkers to a youngster fresh out of Yale whose name was Meryl Streep, right? If you remember Happy End. The legendary musical Candide was considered unproducible until Bob Kalfin convinced Harold Prince to revive it for the Chelsea. And his example created a template for the modern artistic director. And that job description might read, do what nobody else is doing, bring new voices into the conversation, and be fearless. And that, it's not mine, and that is what makes Bob Kalfin, in our view, a legend of Off-Broadway. Please welcome Bob Kalfin.
I have to say, this is something that was totally unexpected. I never thought such a thing could happen, and so I'm very moved by it. I prepared some words to say, but this is double-spaced and large type with lots of cuts, so it's not as long as it looks. Okay. But there's some things I do want to share with you, some of which Peter alluded to, and are just about things that are very close to my heart. I owe my career, I gotta put it, all right, do it here, can you hear me? All right, yes. I owe my career and the major relationships of my life to Off-Broadway, a world that offered me unlimited opportunity for exploration and taking risks. I entered this world at an exciting time in American theater. Genet's The Maids and The Blacks, the Threepenny Opera, Geraldine Page and Summer and Smoke at Sheridan Square, Circle and Square at Sheridan Square, experimental new American plays, freshly arrived works by post-war European avant-garde playwrights. Ionesco, Giraudoux, Beckett, and Inouye were on the Off-Broadway boards. And David Ross's mesmerizing productions of Chekhov in Stark Young's translations were playing in a tiny space on East 4th Street, where I ran lights in the summer of my second year at Yale. It was a world bustling with vitality, and it was a revelation. Thanks to the efforts of Jerry Talma of the Village Voice and Arthur Gelb of the New York Times, the New York Theater critics were slowly pressed to pay attention to these productions. Though Broadway occasionally mounted such plays with star-name performers in the great roles they offered, these downtown events contrasted vividly with much of the off-Broadway theater, of the Broadway theater of the time. I turn a page. It was a gap that had to be filled, and off-Broadway audaciously filled it. And it did so in commercial productions. The idea of not-for-profit theater and subscription audiences had not yet reached New York from the nascent regional theater movement. Let me set the scene. Culture, for a brief historical moment, was then becoming a hula hoop-like fad in attempted emulations of the British National Theatre, the Comédie Française, the Berliner Ensemble, and other major European theaters. The APA, Association of Producing Artists, under the direction of Ellis Rabb, did productions in repertory of the great plays of American literature and world drama with companies that included Rosemary Harris, George Grizzard, Eva Le Gallienne, and Helen Hayes, to name a few artists committed to this ideal. And there was also the Phoenix Company doing such plays as Schiller's Mary Stuart with a great American actress, Irene Worth. Joe Papp doing Free Shakespeare in the Parks, and the revolutionary productions of the Living Theater. It was around this time that a big hole was dug in the ground on the south side of the street opposite Washington Square Park. Jules Irving and Herbert Blau were brought from their Actors Workshop company in San Francisco to start doing plays there, a temporary home for the dream of a great new national American theater company housed in facilities under construction at Lincoln Center, with a stage modeled after the Stratford Canadian Shakespeare Festival and the Tyrone Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis. 2 years after graduation from Yale, I directed my first off-Broadway production. In the cultural tradition of theater that I was weaned upon, I staged a play in response to the Ban the Bomb demonstrations of the time. It was an English adaptation by Ruth Wolff of a classic dramatic poem written in Yiddish by H. Levick, a work based on a famous legend and the forerunner of the Frankenstein and Superman stories. It is called The Golem, and raises the moral issue of creating and unleashing such a force, even against your enemies. The Golem cost $12,000 to produce, with a cast of 26 actors. As not-for-profit theater did not yet exist, money for the production was raised from friends and relatives by myself and my Yale schoolmate colleague and co-producer, the actor George Morfogen. It was a bit like raising money for showcase productions now. Shortly afterwards, winds blowing the seeds of not-for-profit theater arrived in New York, and the first wave of seasonal off-Broadway theaters took root. The Chelsea Theater Center, Manhattan Theater Club, La Mama, Circle Repertory Theater, Playwrights Horizons, Circle in the Square, and others began to produce plays off-Broadway on a seasonal basis with money up front from subscribers. Grants from the National Endowment, the New York State Council for the Arts, the city's borough departments of cultural affairs, contributions like the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, the Snowden Foundation's gifts for the production of new plays, and private and corporate donors. Our off-Broadway theaters were enthusiastically supported in our work of taking unlimited risks. It was as though the Messiah had come. As mentioned, I was able to talk Hal Prince into resurrecting Leonard Bernstein's Candide in a new environmental stage production by Eugene Lee, a musical that was doomed to permanent failurehood after the initial Broadway production, and subsidized up the wazoo my theater produced, as he mentioned, in a 180-seat house, Genet's almost 7-hour-long masterpiece, The Screens, with a cast covering 50 roles. Crazy, if you think about it now, but we were fulfilling an ideal. Nowadays, to get a play on or a new musical with a cast of more than 6 actors is an uphill climb. And our playwrights are boxed in by this. Almost done. Most of the plays we call classics deal with larger than domestic issues, be it Shakespeare, Shaw, Chekhov, Molière, or Brecht. They were written for theaters with acting companies to perform them. We have off-Broadway theaters that work hard to emulate this tradition, and some regional theaters as well. But plays like Amadeus, Nicholas Nickleby, War Horse, and Wolf Hall have to come from England, with the Steppenwolf Stage Company's adaptation of The Grapes of Wrath, a rare exception. If Ibsen's An Enemy of the People was a new American play, where could he get it on? And if Hamlet was a new play, how on earth could you figure out how to market it? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm over. Our ideals keep us afloat, and Off-Broadway is a seminal force. We all know how many years it may take to get a play on the boards. I am pregnant with at least 5 seasons of new plays I'd kill to get on, ranging in size from 1 to a dozen actors with others in between. Imagine this, we used to regard a cast of 14 to 16 as a medium-sized play. The goals of Off-Broadway and the not-for-profit system are different from the goals of the American entertainment industry. As my great friend and mentor, John Hirsch, who founded the Manitoba Theatre Center and was artistic director of both Lincoln Center and Stratford Ontario Shakespeare, memorably once said to me, "You can't run a monastery on 42nd Street." Well, we all keep trying. I say thank God for that difference. We all know how many years it takes, as I said, to get a play on. We are anything if not creative. I salute the regional theaters that dare to produce plays with unknown titles that nobody ever heard of, and laboratories like the Sundance Theater Festival. But most of all, I salute the fervent, effervescent petri dishes of off and off-Broadway theaters, large and small, in church halls, rehearsal rooms, storefronts, closets, basements, wherever they can exist in throughout the 5 boroughs. They irrepressibly inject their energy, originality, creativity, and vitality into the bloodstream of American theater and eventually into the mainstream. We can't do without them. Here and now, I want to express my gratitude to all those who keep that difference alive. Vive la différence, long may it wave. I thank you for this opportunity and the honor.